Okay, good. So we have all panelists. Neela, can you hear? Are you good? Okay, great. So a little bit of connectivity challenge is typical these days. We're rolling with that kind of thing with grace these days. So haven't we grown in our last year? So welcome to this panel. This is a collection of people who have been working together in different ways for a long time. There are basically two backgrounds here. One, the context of working together in a program called the Community Leadership Program, and the other, a context of working together in a course offered through Yale School of Management called Interpersonal and Group Dynamics. I am the primary faculty member in that course, which is kind of like a program, so I might want to sneaking into the program language. It's program-like in that it has various levels, so you can take courses at Yale School of Management that are required in the core that help you to prepare for the interpersonal group dynamics kind of learning, and then you can take courses afterwards, and so it has a sequence, so it's programmatic in that way. But more the way that it's a program is that it has kind of a life in some ways behind the scenes of people who facilitate and hold the space. We behind the scenes, with full transparency, it's not very secret, call the course Hope for Humanity. And the people who are behind the scenes are part of a facilitator community, the people who help create learning in the rooms. And so the people who are here on the panel with me, I will be moderating. They'll each introduce themselves as we open up the panel for their voices after I give a little bit more context. They've each facilitated this course multiple times, and continue to have other lives as well. So there are multiple things that this panel is doing, and yet we come together from this common shared way of learning. So a couple of things about this course and this base of knowing each other. This Interpersonal and Group Dynamics course, which we'll refer to as IPD, it has been a popular course at the School of Management for many years. It's often one of the kind of courses that has a buzz, that is something you have to take. And so why is that? What is the buzz from? It's partly from this idea that it has the possibility of transformation, that you can really kind of change yourself and your ways through this. It's a different kind of learning. Specifically, the learning, of course, is around interpersonal and group dynamics. And just to give people a kind of a sense, the course has some objectives. We're here to learn interpersonal skills. I'm just kind of looking at the syllabus as I kind of reference. We ask people to kind of direct their own learning, to identify and pursue learning goals that are actually important and relevant to you. So it's a really important piece of the learning, because we're going to ask the panel to talk a little bit about what they've learned, and you'll hear a piece of that, whatever they happen to say today. But we also ask the students regularly in the course to reflect on that question. What are you trying to learn? What are you learning? What are your goals for learning? 3 different kinds of questions, but the invitation into your own agency and autonomy around your learning is really important in this context. And something that's important now for our times, both times racial justice and equity, thinking about leadership in that context, thinking about leading in the context of ambiguity and change, is very relevant to this next piece of the course, which is about learning to learn. How can we learn actually how to adapt, how to change, how to grow, how to be dynamic? If we think about learning as, reading a book, and then being able to talk about it, we're really limiting our ideas of learning. A lot of what we have to do in learning these days is actually adapt from what we're experiencing, from our lived experience. And some of our lived experiences are neither chosen nor comfortable. And so the Interpersonal Group Dynamics course includes that whole spectrum. We have readings, and we have experiences, some of which are wonderful and joyful, and some of which are really hard. And the learning comes from the whole spectrum. So the people who facilitate the course are asked to sit with the students for 3 hours a week. in basically an unstructured laboratory environment where we discover what the hope is for humanity and through our interpersonal and group dynamics. And the job of the facilitator is defined simply as help to create the conditions for learning. That's it. They're not there to run the rooms, run exercises, answer particular questions, make anxiety about learning go away by structuring a kind of product or process. They're there to open the space. So today we're going to open the space in a similar kind of spirit by inviting the panelists to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about what have you learned through IPD and your various experiences in it. So let me turn first to Neela, who's had a lot to do with putting this day together and inviting these particular voices, including mine, into the conversation today. So Neela, can I start with you?
Thank you, Heidi. I had a feeling. It is really good to be with this group of leaders and learners. I've grown up with this group. So when I thought about this panel, I thought about kind of the through line of my own career. So, you know, to give some context, now my title is I head strategy and management at Goldman Sachs's Office of Corporate Engagement, which is a title for, you know, in that context, I work with community organizations and I work with people at the firm every day. So the currency of my work is people, teams, groups, right? Both within the firm, there are many subcultures across the firm, between the firm and other groups outside the firm. I'm brokering constantly. And part of what I'm channeling in how do I integrity with myself, but also how do I show up in ways that feel in relationship to others? Because often there can be kind of an urge or a pull to kind of move into a transactional way of being and doing to kind of get the stuff done. Way. And so what I find the invitation from IPD is really what's another way? And some of that is actually down to give ourselves more choice in kind of how we may show up. And so being this group of humans is a reminder to me every time of what's possible. And the learning, of course, yourself, even when you're not among friends, to kind of continue to return to yourself time and time again as you're moving through the world and experiencing different dynamics.
And Neela, is there an answer that you have? Is there another way to the transactional? I mean, you're in the world of Goldman Sachs, you identified as, a company thriving in the domain of transactions. So both on the product side and on the process side, transactions are the kind of way of business. So is there enough? What do you mean by another way? Is there another way?
So it's true, the firm and certainly people like me who gravitate towards it, we take a lot of pride in execution, right? So there's like a lot of pride in operation. And I think part of the other way is kind of broadening what excellence means. So, often we'll kind of say, oh, well, this is like some of the softer side, like the emotive, we kind of put it in another box. And I'm saying, let's integrate it all in. So can we be excellent in holding a relationship with a partner such that they feel kind of seen and whole while being in relationship? Excellent in having our people feel respected as we go through a process, even as we deliver on the other side of it. So part of what I'm trying to do every day is kind of expand what it means to be excellent in this context of a highly transactional, execution-oriented environment. Some through my own embodiment and some through, frankly, building with others, kind of what that could look like.
Oh, thanks. Eric Clemens, can we get you to introduce yourself, say a little bit about what you do and what you learned in IPD?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. And it's good to be with my family again. It's been way too long. I'm Eric Clemens, founding CEO and president of the Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology in New Haven, Connecticut. I want to talk about IPD and how the things that I learned that I still carry with me and still have some inner tension with, and that is really honest and deep self-reflection. And from that honest and deep self-reflection, I have this inner tension between self-preservation and self-discovery, right? What are the things that I am learning about myself by showing up with a group of people who are really like checking me, right? And what are the things how did I think about showing up in the world? And how am I really showing up in the world to people? And so there's this inner tension because of the deep self-reflection, because of the feedback that I'm getting, that there's this inner tension between self-preservation, trying to be who I really am that is safe, while at the same time toiling with what I'm discovering about myself based on the feedback I'm getting. And in that is a deep sense of courage, about really like, how am I walking in the world again, and who I really am, and who I really want to be, right? Who I really thought I was really wasn't who I was, based on the feedback I'm getting and this honest reflection. So I'm really thinking about that, and also trying to square that and scale it in community, having those types of conversations with community stakeholders about who they think they are and who they really want to be. And so that's, to your question, really that's what IPD did for me, right? It helped me and messed me up all at the same time. And so, but also, it really allowed me to listen to folks, especially students, who are really trying to figure the world out. Very smart, very capable, and some very scared, right? But having the courage enough to sit in that circle and wrestle with themselves openly. So it's just an amazing experience.
Thank you, Eric. I want to come back to you maybe a little bit later in the panel, maybe come back to everyone about some kind of question that comes up. But since we're having some, at least from my view, it's hard to see your picture clearly. There's a little bit of distortion in your image. I don't know if that's just my screen or it's everyone's, but you're talking about showing up, and so you're not showing up clearly on my question about showing up. And given your position of the work that you do in the world, it's kind of like you've kind of made it. You've arrived. You've got positional authority and influence and impact. So what does somebody like you have to learn in that? So I'd love to, if it occurs to you, let me get the other people to introduce themselves. If you come back with a story, like what's a moment when you had a chance to think about this is a moment of learning, just so people can start to get their heads around. You've been invited to these prominent panels and you give so many talks. What does a man like Eric Clemens have to learn?
Can you see me? Because I can see me.
Yeah,
no?
That's kind of how it works. It's the fundamental question. Right? So there's a whole story right there.
So one really incredible lesson that I learned, and you are right, I've been very blessed to be invited into these very powerful rooms and these powerful tables. And one very life-changing lesson I learned was, a lot of times I sit in these rooms and I get othered a lot, right? There's this black guy in this room, not only the only black guy, the only black person in this room. And I always felt like I was being stabbed, but I couldn't see the knife, right? Very subversive language and these types of things. And I used to wonder, or actually think, that for the most part, these white guys really think that I don't deserve to be in this room. But then I started really asking them questions, right? In a very kind of feedback loop manner. And what I realized was, it wasn't that they didn't think I deserved to be in the room. It was they didn't deserve to be in the room. And now I know it. And so it was that kind of feedback, kind of Socratic way of engaging people that allowed me to feel comfortable in the blessings that I sit in. And so, that was probably the best and most powerful lesson that I learned. Not only because I learned it, but I'm able to teach it now.
Thank you. So Heidi, would you say a little bit about what you do in the world and what you learned in IPD or are learning?
Sure, thanks. It's good to see everyone. Well, what I do in the world is I advise philanthropists on his programmatic investments and philanthropic work. But really, the translation is that I get to listen, interact, and learn all the time. Yeah. I am learning from folks that are proposing ideas and possibilities in the community. They're walking into the vision they have for the work that they want to see in the world and the type of world that they will envision. And I get to wrestle with ideas. I get to wrestle with big, bold, and courageous ideas about change and progress and equity and justice. And so I get to listen, I get to interact, I get to ask questions. And at the same time, I get to sit with folks who can make the decisions on philanthropic gifts and support and connection. And so that's sort of the work that I'm involved in. And I came to IPD by virtue of invitation from Heidi, of course. And, you know, one of the things about an invitation is that there's a bit of a mystery in what I might be getting into, but it's sort of a mystery of my own sort of sensibilities, like not knowing a space that I'm entering and not knowing the people that I'm going to be with. And when you get to sit in a circle, and I have sat in a lot of circles with everyone on this panel, you have no choice to be seen. People can look at you. You can't hide in the ways that you might be able to hide in a persona and so just being in the arena with other folks means that your heart rate's going to go up a little bit. And that heart rate needs to be modified. It needs to be learned. So that heart rate tells me something's happening with me and something's moving inside of me. And there's some type of energy there and I have to make sense of it. What is that? And I get to play with that. And IPD offered me the space to learn about myself and also to be able to facilitate that learning condition for others. And so I pay attention to that in any conversation that I'm in. And I have to say some conversations are much more difficult, but they have gotten easier over time because of the practice of paying attention to your somatic energy, paying attention to the words that are coming out. I remember a time, I think Heidi, you probably know this because we worked together for many years. It's just that the capacity for me to get agitated increases pretty quickly. If I hear something that doesn't sit well with my value system, or if I hear something that is harmful, or if there's a exchange that requires me to be in an action mode through my words, my energy level increases. And I had to learn a lot about myself, about how I show up in that space and what happens to me, what happens to folks, how people are reacting to that energy. And so being at peace and at ease, but also really being rigorous and inviting in the same manner to keep the conversation going, to keep the discussion going, but also being honest with my own feelings and emotions. So the space offered me so much learning about myself, but also an opportunity to practice something, because it gets better over time through practice. And I continue to use it. I would say anytime I have interaction where I could feel my heartbeat going up or my heart rate going up.
in the circles where you sit, when kind of like, decision making around gifts and grants, what's an issue that kind of raises people's hearts around the table, and how do you use those moments for learning for yourself or others? Be curious about the overlap, given the context of this conference.
Sure. Yeah, it's a fascinating question because it varies so much contextually. An example of this I'm carrying a value system. I'm coming in with an identity as an immigrant, as a person who's have particular experiences in life that bias me to the types of things that I want to see more in the world. And that might be funding and support for youth development, might be funding and support for learning. And so my biases are pretty present. So my excitement for something that comes my way of a conversation. And if I had to make the decision, I wouldn't hesitate to do it quickly, but I have to go through a process to be able to share that enthusiasm, to share that type of excitement with people who are making the decisions, and to answer some of those questions, and to convince, to persuade, and to really portray in a way the type of work that resonates with their values, and to sort of confirm that the decisions they're making are in line. And sometimes the energy is not there, and sometimes I have to really go to bat and stay in a conversation, ask the tough questions, and ask questions that are unusual because they provide a mirror to the person to say, well, you said you were about this, and here's an opportunity. What are we going to do about it? Can we sit with this a little bit? On the other side, the same sort of formula applies for folks that, I would have to politely and respectfully to say that we cannot support an initiative or cannot support the proposal as you've requested it, and here are the reasons why. So I have to be able to express my yes while I'm also expressing my no to them, right? Meaning, here's why, because we're committed to this, and this doesn't make sense for us right at this moment.
Your way of being combines invitation and accountability and a kind of confrontation all in one, somehow with grace. Thanks a lot. And Rachel Gilroy, tell us a little bit about what you're up to in the world and about your IPD learning.
Hello. First of all, I'm so happy to be part of this panel. I feel like home, Eric. My name is Rachel Gilroy. My world is Senior Project Manager for the Housing Authority of New Haven, Connecticut, Elm City Communities. To the, what did I learn from IPD? I would say that it helped me accept and practice being a human being instead of a human doing. And all the glory and feelings and emotions, anger, sadness, happy that comes with being a human being in the world. And because of those things, I can talk to CEOs and down to talking to residents in low-income housing, heart to heart, mind to mind, and all the messiness that comes with being a human. And so it gives me, one of the things from that opening session that took from me about I wrote it on my whiteboard, the power of anger and how it can be used to create love, like that. Like, what does that look like in building our communities? That's stuck with me for the last 2 days. Yeah, that's why I'm here, and I keep coming back.
So can I ask you, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're kind of facing in your work, in your industry? And how does IPD kind of learning show up as wisdom in that context?
So I would say just the concept of how I relate to values, as much like Fahad said, and how others relate to values. There's so much diversity of thought and mind around those kind of connections, and being able to have those conversations to get work done. And just, yeah. Yeah, that keeps me busy.
Yeah. You framed your introduction around the being part, and there's
Yep.
there's so
Just
much.
being in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, sitting with it, even when it's uncomfortable, is building it. It's like a muscle, an emotional muscle that I work on every day, and then figuring out what those pressure points are, those trigger points in myself that keeps me from seeing or being seen. I'm always working on that stuff.
Well, so let's let the audience know that in about 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to open up questions. So feel free to put your questions into the chat, and we'll have a way to bring those into the conversation. So it's not too early to put questions into written form. And then we'll moderate those into the conversation. But let's bring the question that I just asked Rachel to everyone. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing? And how does your experience in interpersonal and group dynamics learning, the learning that you referred to already, and something else that you might also bring to the table in this conversation now, how is it helping you to serve maybe as a kind of wisdom? We're in tremendous need of wisdom these days about being human well in a challenging context, left, right, up, down, front, and center. So how has this kind of learning turned into wisdom? It doesn't always look wise when we're learning it. When we're in the moment, actually learning occurring, it might look actually pretty messy and feel pretty uncomfortable. But that kind of learning can translate into wisdom if you let it emerge, marinate, and grow. So I wonder if there are examples of some of the challenges you're facing and how it's turned into wisdom from a learning base. So Eric, how about you?
But I saw Neela reach her hand up to unmute. I think the biggest challenge, I have many challenges, even in the midst of many blessings. And I think one of my biggest challenges is really having all my life growing up poor and quite frankly marginalized, and learning with great skill how to navigate the world for survival. And I now navigate the world based on success, which I didn't learn that, right? And so that has been a great challenge for me, not just in a technical sense, but really accepting the leadership role in the realm of success, in a way, knowing that I am modeling for other people, not only the folks who I came from, but the folks who are striving to be successful in whatever successful means to them. And then hopefully having enough experiences, Heidi, that I can create those experiences and deliver them as wisdom. And that has been very difficult because there are many barriers. There are more barriers in the realm of success than I've ever experienced while just struggling. And so how do I navigate those things successfully with a level of precision, and again, deliver them to folks who are depending on me for whatever reason, as wisdom. And so that I'm really struggling with that, but still at it every day. And again, IPD has helped me because within the struggle, within the pain and within the striving and the beauty of the struggle, I'm always reflecting and thinking deeply about who I am versus who I hope to be. And so those are the things that I struggle with, and I think that it's a mostly a manufactured struggle for me, right? That comes from a deep sense of guilt, a deep sense of just being surprised, and a deep sense of skill as well. So that's kind of my daily struggle.
You for the generous answer. It gives us a sense of kind of what sits on your heart and your mind, and it reminds me that we don't think to ourselves, I'm going to do a wise thing now. That's not how it works. Wisdom is like, hopefully it's how it's perceived or how it comes out afterwards. But when sometimes we're not in control of that. Yeah, thanks, Eric. So Neela, were you reaching out to answer this question? We can't hear you. Yep, it indicates that you're muted. So we're not able to hear you. Why don't I see if I want to check with Fahad, and if you're able to unmute, leave it unmuted, and we'll come to you next. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Yeah.
And so, Heidi, you were asking me about challenges. Is that the question?
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing, and how does your IPD learning show up as wisdom in the face of challenge? We hope at best that we can be wise or gracious or less reactive rather than blaming and self-protective and critical. So we have hopes, especially from a kind of leadership, the way that we lead and interact. At the very least, we don't make things worse with our own reactivity and being triggered. So that's kind of personal way of thinking about it, kind of managing the self. And that's partly, leaning into the answer that you gave when you introduced yourself. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing from your role and work? And is there wisdom that you connect with your IPD learning that helps you manage and think about those challenges?
Thanks for clarifying that and framing that up. Let's talk a little bit about challenges, because we cannot just pretend things are not happening in the world, or we haven't lived through something in the last 12 months or longer, if you will. And the challenge is if you're paying attention, what do you do with this energy that you see, and what do you do with the suffering that you see in day to day? What do you do with emotions that your loved ones have, family members have, people that you're in a relationship with, and how do you make sense of that in the work that I'm doing, and also my role in the community? If I just separate the work and say that who I am in this community, what do I represent, and how do I want to be in this community in this moment when the stakes are so incredibly high? And if we don't make decisions, if we don't act with courage, if we don't move with bold and swift ways of really addressing the needs, and what's the consequence if we don't do that? And so for me, the urgency is incredibly real and personal, and because it's about a value system that I hold. It's a value system that influenced my getting into working with people in the communities. I'm a trained counselor. I started working initially doing prison work, and then youth development work, and then doing work in the administration management. So I was a person in my early 20s on the streets, listening to stories and fielding the realities that people were able to express to me, and to be able to do something about it. And so we have lots of communication coming our way, and we're living through something big right now. And it also requires us to be big in holding that container, to be able to have those conversations. And let's not pretend that we're apolitical, and let's not pretend that we have the real middle line here. We have to take a stand. And I think that's, for me, is a big pressing challenge. It is to be able to convince my peers that we have to act now, we have to act swiftly, and we have to get money out in the community. We have to push our peers to be able to respond in a way that is at the scale of the problem. And if we underestimate the scale of the problem, then I think there's a particular cost to us, but also to the people that we care about in the community that we want to build. So for me, it's a constant battle. And to be able to do that virtually in a physical distant world is very difficult, because I experience my best self with people. And then it's harder to be able to sense. I'm, in fact, getting a little better at sensing people through virtual and Zoom meetings and such. But it's also an opportunity to be able to, the learning for me from IPD is to be able to self-manage so that I can compose myself in a way that can get the message across. And if I don't, I don't always have to be composed. I say that I fail pretty regularly on that front, because I'm passionate and I care, and I want people to get it like yesterday, right? And so there's a lot of wisdom that I take from the experiences of being in difficult conversations, staying in those difficult conversations longer, and knowing that I have the capacity to recover a relationship if I have gone off or have said something that could be hurtful or harmful. But really, the wisdom is always catching up with the experience, right? You have to be in the experience before the wisdom. Like, you can't just be leading with your wisdom. You have to be in the experience, and the wisdom follows afterwards. And it often follows when people give you feedback. It often follows when you're in relationship with people. It often follows when you have time to reflect, meditate, walk, breathe. And often follows when you are, coming from angles that you might not see. It may come from a poem. It may come from a short story. It may come from a multimedia experience. So for me, being at the threshold and being in new arenas and new conversations is critically important.
Thank you, Fahad. So
I'd like to oh, sorry. Go ahead, Heidi. No, it's something that just resonated about being in the experience. I see a comment in the chat that says, aside from listening, what else do you do with this practice? And I'm thinking to myself, listening is always there. And a lot of what I do on the ground is conflict negotiations. And the wisdom for me is around being in it, in that experience, and listening to all those multiple pieces happening on the ground, and then seeing what we all can grow out of it and come to some fruition. Because a lot of my work in construction management is literally, we're building things, and it has to do with homes for people and people moving. And there's always something messy around values and conflict that's going on all the time, with the constant active listening that has to happen. I just wanted to that resonated with me, Fahad, when you were mentioning wisdom comes out of being in the experience.
yeah, it just this word experience, Rachel, I'll bounce off of where led, and the energy from Fahad of kind of being in the experience. In some ways, our ideas about learning mean that we can write something down and then it's knowable. If we can read about it, or read about it, especially in a way that we can critique it, that we recognize that as a conventional learning pattern. We can read it, we can see it, we can critique it, or we can do a problem set about it. That's knowledge. And yet we have a lot of problems in the world that don't that aren't in that form. So, one of the, I think, great gifts of COVID is that everyone knew there was not a manual. We did not have a guidebook, a playbook, or a textbook about how to get through this time, personally, about wellness or about organization or about leadership. And so there was not the idea that we had a book to read. So then we were forced to learn from experience, from trial and error, from being in the experience. And it turns out that that way of learning is always available to us, but we often don't think of it as learning opportunity. We think about it as getting through the day. And so, there was, to the question that you asked, and I don't see a lot of questions in the chat. Maybe that's kind of what I can see. But to the question that you did see, Rachel, maybe we actually can start to underscore some of what you're pointing to, because the panel can probably hear some of the learning components and some of the IPD kind of touch points that other people might not be able to hear because we're not in a didactic format. Now, this course doesn't really get delivered in such a didactic format. I do teach it, and there are readings, but I do not do kind of heavy lecture and testing around the concepts. Really, the concept is really to learn from your experience and to learn how to learn from your experience. Something humanity has really got to get better at it. We have all of the experiences that we need to be thriving. We haven't had everyone else's experience, so we lack empathy, but we're not very good at building empathy from learning about other people's experience, even when we have few opportunities to do that. So how can we get better at getting better in a world where we don't have the textbook available to us all of the time? That's some of the invitation. So let's kind of underscore for the audience, and also for us, it's a good exercise. What are some of the pieces that are kind of skills and practices and mindsets? They're actually coming up, but the audience might not be able to hear them because they haven't had the experience of going through the course. It makes its own argument. So, some of the pieces that I've heard include, the capacity to recover back to a set of values, the capacity to kind of predict moments that might be difficult for you, the capacity to listen to others with a belief in their capacity, even when you really kind of are feeling a little itchy and kind of provoked by everything they're doing, saying, being, and standing for in the moment. Can you actually believe that they're coming from a positive intention and still regard them and interact with them from a place of respect, and yet disagree and still speak and be in relationship? So just some pieces that I'm hearing in this conversation. Neela, are we able to hear your voice yet and your comment that you were planning to offer?
I don't know. Are we?
Great.
Yay. Thank you. Well, I was going to toggle back to that moment where Brother E was talking about who I am and who I want to be, because that actually resonated very deeply with me, and I think may resonate with others in the audience. This, we're all kind of striving, right, to some notion of who we think we can be, and I think one is it kind of simplifies things, because you can kind of start to say, okay, like, when do I feel most myself? Like, when do I feel like just calmer, in alignment, like capable, and starting to listen to your life. You had said, like, kind of just getting through the day or hurtling through or kind of moving from thing to thing, but then starting to pay attention to when are those moments that you kind of ease into yourself a bit more, and like, who are the people you do that with? Because those are the people you want to build with. And so that's been, I would say, that I've been paying it more attention to. We live in a we're in a very abundant, opportunity-filled society. Who are the people you want to build with, and what outcomes you want to build towards, right? And as we get more self, right, we could be more focused in the agenda that we want to hold in the world, and the outcomes we want to build start to feel much simpler in some ways, even while we continue to operate in what often feels like a very complex and crowded world. But it's kind of the coming home of.
There's a certain kind of like evidence of wisdom starting to emerge when the complex actually seems to have a simple structure. All right. And so it's part of why we refer to this course as Hope for Humanity. In some ways, it's just about being human well when it might be a little bit difficult. And so that's kind of a simple invitation to be
Yeah,
your best.
you know what? Can I
Please.
build on that? Heidi and Neela just said it so beautifully, but also, you know, while in the IPD circle, I was always looking for the climax. Like, what is all of this? What is the sum of this, right? And I realized for me, it was just to be seen. Now, the caution in that was being seen, not in a way that I thought I was, but I think it's really important to note that my experience, and I think a lot of other people's experiences, is, you know, looking for that climax. What is all of this is equal to what? But was it what the value that was important to me in all of that was I wanted to be seen. That's right, because if I felt like I could be seen, then in some way I can be loved. That was the equal to me. So that's what it was about for me. And I think in some cases it still is, right? That being seen is being loved, even if in fact you're not seen the way you want to be. But so I just wanted to add that too, right? That you know, I know folks might have an expectation, right? You know, what is the grade? So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Eric, can I build on that a little bit? Part of the takeaway, we talked a little bit about the capacity to be in communication or be in a conversation or predict that moment. But big takeaway for me is that I'm carrying a lot of experience, and some are my peer learners in this circle. And in that experience, whether something happened the day before or 3 hours earlier, is coming into the room with me. And now we're going to have a conversation about something that may in fact invite an opportunity for me to talk about what I'm carrying, or may in fact infuriate or get me to feel a certain way about it. And so the part that I think carries over for me for day to day is I don't underestimate what people are carrying. I'm not going to be blind to that. I ask about it. What are you carrying today? What is it that's on your mind? What is it in your heart that you bring into a meeting? So when we start meetings, in a lot of our work, we do a check-in. What's happening with you today? And it's hard to do that with a large group, but what is happening with you today? What do you want to name before we get into the work? Because we recognize the dignity of who you are and what you might be going through. And I get to work with folks that, you know, some of my colleagues have had some difficult health moments. And I can't pretend that that hasn't happened. And I have to be able to sort of walk in with the compassion to be able to say, all right, we're working and this project is important, but I also know that you are, or you have had this experience, and I'm not going to pretend that hasn't happened. So for me, that's a critical component of being in relationship, being in an opportunity to build a solid performing team, because you have to name the things that historically we've been taught not to, which is you just show up and play and do the thing. Play that role. You know, you're a positional player, you're a guard in the basketball team. This is what you do. You pass the ball and shoot the ball, right? And so for me, that was a really critical moment, that to be able to understand that people are carrying a lot of things. I'm carrying a lot of things, and I have to check myself every time I'm in a meeting with something, someone, or some initiative.
And these are pretty simple things that we're naming, kind of acknowledging what is, in your words. I mean, the spirit of what you just talked about, Fahad, Eric, the spirit of being seen. Have lots of practices of avoidance against. So our convention is not to acknowledge what is, but to avoid, to talk around, to distract, to change the subject, to critique, to change, to kind of change the person that you're paying attention to. So we're really very skilled at not talking about it. Sometimes we call that professionalism, but I think we're kind of fooling ourselves in thinking that we can create an environment in which people can thrive in the context of which we don't acknowledge what it means to really be human across the entire spectrum of the life experience. They expect people to just be able to index on productivity and the task rather than living a life that continues. Okay, so I think we, Anshul, if there are questions that are coming up in the chat, it's now time to invite your voice in, so please, show up on screen if there are questions that we should answer and transition to.
Yes, I just enabled Denzel. I don't know if they can come on. I don't see them now. There is another question though. From Eba, which says, how can nonprofit set a standard for better interpersonal dynamics and also for mentorships? This is a question from the chat that I just picked up.
Okay, anybody want to take that? How can nonprofit employers set a standard for better interpersonal dynamics, and perhaps including mentorships?
One thing that I'll start off, one thing that I do in that regard is I talk more about my failures and what I struggle with than my successes, because I always want to come across as different than the people who work with me. And I've had great success. I'll be very honest with you, and I'm very happy about it. While at the same time, there is a struggle to get to success. And so I think it's important for nonprofit leaders who have folks working with, for, and watching them really need to be as vulnerable as possible, right? Because I think, to your point earlier, Heidi, I think people who are ultra professional or create a veneer of professionalism are really folks who are scared to be seen, right? And scared to be, and if not scared to be seen, scared to be exposed for what they don't know and what they can't do. And so I think you might as well just get it all out in early, right? And tell people what you don't know and what you're learning how to do. And like I tell my staff, just because you don't know how to do something does not mean you can't. And so just having conversations like that to express your deep sense of humanity, vulnerability, and I think when you express humanity plus vulnerability, that is really expressing love. And so I think that's really important.
Nice. And it turns out, since this is really a kind of learning focused panel, one of the most profound things kind of a leader or someone in position of influence can do to create the conditions for learning is to create psychological safety in the room. And we can do that through vulnerability, making it okay to be a learner, to not have it all kind of together. So it's advice that's directly relevant to this learning energy. Anshula, should we take?
If I can just
Yeah, please. Go ahead, Neela, and then we'll turn back to Anshula.
Oh, good. I was like, maybe they can't hear me again. So I was just gonna. I had all my operating experience was in the nonprofit sector before I came to Goldman, and to build on what Brother just said, I think, part of interpersonal dynamics, it turns out it's a time intensive game. There aren't efficiencies in relationships and trust, and so it is like creating real time and space for them. So the simple thing a simple yet profound thing that Fahad said, it literally built in time into a meeting agenda to check in with people before diving into the work at hand. And you kind of think about during the course of your day and how we spend our time, what allow people to really build with each other into the task at hand. Like, kind of, what are we trading against, right? So I think that part of it is just paying attention to how we are spending our time and our energy, because that it all adds up.
Yeah. Where do we spend all of that time and energy? How does it add up against the kind of values that we have and the impact that we want to have? Anshula, what other questions should we pay attention to?
There's this one from Anne-Marie, which says, how can we better normalize the valuation and systematic implementation of IPD principles?
Evaluation and systematic implementation of IPD principles, which in themselves are actually even hard to see. Thoughts from the panel? Normalizing the valuation, systematic implementation of IPD principles. How could we do that? It's not an easy question.
Well, I think something there that quickly comes to me, I mean, I'm not sure if this is answering the question or not. I mean, a good chunk of what Eric and Neela and Rachel and I are talking about is also being an agent of change within the organizational culture that you're operating in. And I say agent change that we're operating systems, and so if there is an opportunity for us to be able to implement a type of norm within our human interactions and agree that that's a norm that we hold and value, then we're really implementing some of the principles of IPD in human interaction and communication. Now, if we know that checking in with each other is important, then that becomes a fabric of how we do what we do, right? And if it means that honesty and transparency is a value and a norm that we're hoping to incorporate in our day-to-day interactions and communication, then we know that that can be had if people take the experience and take the risk to do that, right? We can't just say it and say, here are our values and that's it, and that's sufficient enough. We have to be able to embody, and this is one of the things that I learn every time I'm with Eric. It's like the embodiment of those values happen. And so when I have an issue in particular, and it was just maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, I picked up the phone and called them and said, listen, I'm having a moment, and I need you to reflect to me that I am okay reacting the way that I am. And it's it's like a real simple thing for my PD. It takes two to know one. Like, I need his input, I need Heidi's input, I need Neela's input and Rachel's input for me to be able to understand what is happening with me at times. And but we have to be able to build that through a norm that this is okay. And so organizationally, that could be done through embodiment, through communication, agreement, but then risk taking. You have to be able to take that risk within the organization and have it be okay.
Professor, you're muted. Sorry.
We need actually some perspective outside of ourselves to know about our impact. Thank you for the kind of link to that particular language. And that's true for us individually. It's also true for our organizations, that we actually don't necessarily know our impact until we're interested in knowing our impact, and we get some feedback about it, about how the organization is showing. Because organizations have values often on the wall. Are they being perceived by the end users and other stakeholders in a way that's consistent? There's a real opportunity for misalignment there. Eric, is that your voice?
Yeah, really quickly, I think, the example that Fahad lifted up, which was so powerful when we were in it, was really undergirded and connected by a deep sense of truth telling, right? And so I think that's really important as well, that we love each other enough to ask for the truth and be told the truth.
Yeah.
And so that's really, really important, and especially to the question, really in some, like what Fahad was saying, that you have to live it, you have to embody it. It exists in you, and you walk in the world with it. So.
Well, it comes to be time for us to close out this conversation and time of being together. There are questions that we have not been able to get to. There are comments. I think things we probably would like to know about each other, and yet this is part of the learning. We only have so much time, and so we have to find more of it, or claim the intention of it. So I would personally love to see all of you on the panel again, and I want to thank the audience for attention. There are some questions about how do people join IPD, and if you're really interested, please email ipd@yale.edu. We do have a facilitator training called Holding Space that is open. And you could apply to join that, and we would welcome you. Meanwhile, thank you to Anshala for convening this conference, to Neela for convening this space, and to all the panelists, Eric and Fahad and Rachel and Neela for showing up. Thanks so much.
And thanks to you, Professor, for moderating this wonderful last panel. We're already a bit emotional, but thanks a lot. But we have to. Thank you so much for being on the call.
Man, it was good being with y'all. That was wow. That was incredible.